Thanks, everyone. 18 minutes. All right, so I have you for 18 minutes. And in 18 minutes, I'm going to cover about 9 years. So that's about 2 minutes per year. And the reason for doing that is the topic is leveraging, uncertainty, or, like we have uncertainty in scale-ups and startups. And uncertainty is pervasive. So we can talk about the current economy, fundraising, macroeconomics, but the concepts of uncertainty are deeply embedded in all business activities. And so the topic is hedgehogging and outfoxing, the psychology of leveraging uncertainty for growth, downtrends, and rebounds. And there's a few interesting concepts in business strategy that I like that are very simplifying ones. One is to be a big fish in a small pond instead of a small fish in a big pond. That's the number one sort of principle for positioning and sort of differentiation in the market. And the other is be a hedgehog, not a fox. And I thought I could put up lots of pictures of fish, but that's not as cute as a hedgehog. And the antithesis of the hedgehog is the fox, and they're, I think, really good paradigms for thinking about uncertainty and decision making. And so any early stage startup or scale up is based upon uncertainty. Yours, your potential clients, the market you're participating in. Startup or scale up, your approach to uncertainty will make or break your success. And you read business books and you get opinions, and it always seems simple on paper, but it's never simple. When you actually step into scaling up a business or executing strategy, there's unbounded optionality. And a friend of mine who spent years sort of being a strategist and being a smart guy in the room and always having answers and running processes and ops, he became a product manager late in life in his sort of 40s. And he'd been working in services all these years. And as soon as he became a product manager, he had to look at the optionality, and it was a completely new experience for him. And that's one of the interesting things about product and product management is so much optionality, so many opinions. And so the metaphor I'm using is the fox and the hedgehog. It's from an essay by Isaiah Berlin, the essayist, not the composer, and it was made very popular in the book Good to Great. We'll get back to that in a second. Uncertainty demands performance in 4 core areas: decision-making, models, culture, and leadership. You notice I didn't mention strategic planning. That doesn't enter the picture in my world. It's useful to think and sort of run scenarios, but ultimately it's models that drive behavior in organizations. Otherwise you're stuck following plans and you're not leveraging your talent. And so we're going to drill down on models, and these are the operating and mental models, and explore how that manifests through the life cycle of a company. And so a hedgehog, quite famously, do one thing better than anyone else. And that's a core principle in From Good to Great, where they looked at public companies. So these are large companies, not startups, but the principles are fairly similar. And what they actually are doing, if you look at it from the perspective of strategy and execution, is they're operating like a startup. And they're understanding what they're best in the world at, and they're executing against it. And so we're going to explore this in 5 acts and a little bit of an epilogue, because a lot of decision making is about psychology. Your psychology, the psychology of your teams, and it's an important consideration because the frame of how you make decisions impacts your decisions a lot. Large companies where there's very few degrees of freedom and maybe not a lot of clarity on operating principles, they become risk averse and plan centric. Smaller companies, they thrive because they can be adaptive and they can solve problems. So we'll get to that as sort of the final bit. And so starting a company, the founder's dilemma: how do you start, where do you go, how do you build a team, what's the idea? Usually when you kick off, you have something that's scratching an itch. You've got a unique wisdom or insight into the world. It's like you're a baseball player and you've been waiting for your pitch and you see it and you know there's something there. And so you start a company. Now, you might get it, but other people might not. There's a quote from Patty McCord, who was the HR at Netflix, is all startups are stupid, otherwise someone would have done it already. And there's something true to that, or the unique sort of approach that you're taking. You've got all of these core challenges. You've got revenue, positioning, demand gen, gross margin, scaling model, evolutionary model, building a team. And then the world's always changing at the same time, and your premises are all changing. And so in some respects, if you want to become an entrepreneur and you want to start a company, there's an aspect of it where you're actually going from great to good. If you're a consultant and you become an entrepreneur, it's not about having all the right answers because you're going into new territory. There's a lot of ambiguity. So you have your concept that you want to take to market and you want to grow it. And so in some respects, you're going from great to good because you're going to really focus on something that's a bit ephemeral. It's going to be a concept, and it's going to become more solid over time. There's an interesting essay about a couple of consultants, and they became entrepreneurs, and they talked about how they shifted from the fox mindset, where they had all the answers, and they just surfaced all the complexity and pointed it out, to when they became an entrepreneur, and they found it extremely annoying to be around consultants, even though they were prior consultants, because they had to nurture this hedgehog. So it's a pretty good analogy. And so you switch from a fox to a hedgehog. That's principle number one. You can't have all the answers. You have to have a concept. You've got to grow that concept. More specifically, the difference between foxes and hedgehogs, fox is a consultant. They look at reality in all its complexity. They tend to look at first order metrics. This could be budget and schedule. They pursue many ends at the same time. They see the world in all its complexity. That's really not going to move the needle in terms of a startup or a new idea or executing on a new initiative. Hedgehog, entrepreneur, they're focused on third order metrics, some that they can't even explain because they have an entrepreneurial strategic model in their mind. The strategy landscape is in their brain. Henry Mintzberg explains this nicely in Strategy Safari, where you have these different strategic operating models, and one is the entrepreneurial one, which is based upon the tacit knowledge and to see around corners in a particular market. They pursue one end vision, and crossing the river by feeling the stones is an analogy for complexity. You cross a river, you can't see the stones, you feel the next stone, you feel the next stone until you get across the river. I actually use this as the title for a talk on digital transformation, because a friend of mine had used it and I liked the concept, but I never looked it up. And about 5 minutes before my talk, I looked it up. And it turned out to be the transformation slogan for the Chinese Communist Party, and I was pitching it to a room full of bankers, which was sort of funny. But it's a great analogy. I quite like it. And so this is the core hedgehog concept. So you're, uncertainty, decision making, if you try to do everything that everyone else is doing, that might feel safe, but that's a sure route to failure because you can't differentiate, you can't it's a race to the bottom. And so your hedgehog concept, for it to really resonate, it has to be about you, it has to be about the opportunity, it has to be about what you know. If it's an existing company, like in Good to Great, it's sort of the attributes and the capabilities of that company, and sort of what can it do moving forward legitimately based upon where it's been in the past and where it can create value in the future. And so what are you deeply passionate about? What can you be the best in the world at? And what drives your economic engine? When Rangle started, it was pretty simple. It was modern JavaScript. It was all of the things that go with that, customer-centric, customer experience, mobile first, and then best practices around it, so lean agile principles. So we were a modern JavaScript, lean agile consultancy, and that sort of grew into everything else as we evolved over time. And I had deep experience in modern sort of JavaScript. I had a lot of experience. There was a lot of people really passionate about it, and there was a big need because it was a big shift in the market. So it was a good hedgehog concept. But that's a starting point. That gets you, a couple of jobs, 5, 10 people. What comes next? And so, but you commit. And Paul Graham talks about default dead in one of his essays on startups. You've got to assume that you're probably going to fail, because if you do that mentally, you can really commit to being successful in that one concept, and you can drive for that deep differentiation and that value creation. So the consistency of decisions around the core hedgehog concept allows the purpose, mission, vision to grow into a flame. Because often the concept is there, but it's not deeply articulated, and it's hard for other people to pick it up, and it needs to grow into an operating model in an organization. So make friends with your inner hedgehog. So you have to do one thing really well, and you need to grow that. So to sort of really anchor that point here, I thought it would be really cool to show some people getting in touch with their inner hedgehog, because you'll remember this. You'll probably forget everything else, but there was that whacked out picture of people in hedgehog costumes. Well, that's great. You know, you have a concept and you got some momentum, but what comes next? Because it's all uncertainty all the time. It's all decision making all the time. But if you anchor on the hedgehog, you know, that core concept, and you sort of really expand out from there, it gives you some clues on how to make decisions and how to move forward. So first off, you know, Act 2, you got momentum, you've made those decisions, you've made a hard commit to something differentiated in the market. Every time I'd go to an event back in 2013, people were like, oh, you're only doing JavaScript. That's sort of crazy. You know, all of our business is in Ruby and Rails and PHP. We'd go out of business if we did that. But because that's all we did, we got all the business. You know, so if anyone came to us for a JavaScript project and they went to one of our competitors, we would win hands down. We closed like 85% of our qualified opportunities. Our average sales cycle was 21 days. Because we were just first in that space, and we were completely obsessed with it. People building new things and new front ends were also interested in Agile. So when we went in Agile only, that also didn't become a blocker. And a lot of people, when they heard that, they go, we can't do that. Every time we try to pitch Agile on a project, they don't want that. They feel it's too risky. Well, in terms of risk models, because this is all we did, people trusted us. This was our differentiator. This was our hedgehog concept. It's all we did. And so there was trust built by that focus. And because all we did was Agile collaboration with clients, we got very good at explaining that. So we're building out that capability by that core focus. So Agile, modern, JavaScript, we were able to execute on it. And we were able to find a lot of people who were really excited about that. So people like-minded who wanted to do modern applications. And so that's your first 15. That's a talk I saw at an event a few years ago. Your first 15 people, they define your culture. There's a really tight communication, and you're getting a lot of alignment on how you operate. That's great. That's at that point in time, but you keep growing and the market keeps changing. And so your hedgehog concepts must become hedgehog constructs. That's sort of the principle there. Teams evolve and the concepts evolve, and you need to get to a construct. So you have your hedgehog concept, which is great, modern JavaScript done agilely. And then every single decision, every kind of challenge, new clients, new markets, digital transformation, scaled design practices, product management, client services. And so you're building this sort of beast of a hedgehog. It's sort of like, I don't know if anyone's seen Power Rangers. My kids used to watch it. The Megazord, everything assembles. It's just, there's a lot of complexity. And so, it's not a simple answer. Like, you can't write this down. People have to experience it and learn it. A lot of it's tacit knowledge, and they'll see things differently. And so you have your model, modern JavaScript, agile, discipline, continuous delivery. Just always focused on that. In a sense, because that was the anchoring concept, big fish in a small pond, that's our hedgehogs. Deviating from that means that you're going off, you might get some more business, but your core value flywheel is lost. And then, how do you think of customer centricity, program management, consulting and transformation, team coaching? And then people join the company, JavaScript, agile discipline, continuous delivery. There's alignment, but different experiences, different beliefs, different personality types. And then, you get into program management, team coaching, consulting and transformation, customer centricity. These can be wildly disparate across, building and scaling a team. And so, you have not only uncertainty in the market, but uncertainty in your experiences. And so process is a terrible substitute for culture and shared principles, but we often fall back on that. And, you end up doing processes and checklists, and people follow the rules, and people aren't applying their full brains. They're just applying what they think they should be doing. So you end up having this sort of culture of taking orders, even if that's sort of not what's intended, but there's so much uncertainty in that core set of principles. So decision making now gets centralized at the top, and the company can't scale. Now, you may get some traction because you hit something that was really needed and you're really running fast as a hedgehog. That works up to 150 people. Once you go over 150, it's a different world, different management styles. You're bringing in new leadership. You have so many new people coming into the company that core shared tacit knowledge starts to dissipate. So you need different kind of operating procedures, and the market changes. If you're going from 1 person to 150, the market's going to change a lot during that period as well. There's new competition, a lot of things change in the market. And so that's where you start making new decisions. You're thinking about operationally, how you're going to scale the company, but if you do it in a traditional manner, you're going to become like everyone else. You're not going to have that agile sort of model. You have a scaling team, changing market, and it gets harder when you thought it would get easier. And so good to great is actually is a pretty good sort of view on that. They talk about level 5 leadership. I think this can be presented broadly. These are leaders that are humble and deeply, deeply knowledgeable about the business. It was one of the things they learned that surprised them. It wasn't the charismatic leader. The hedgehog concept and then the flywheel and that sort of discipline of evolving the company. You'll get to a point where, purpose, mission, values, you talk about it, you put it up, but it doesn't actually drive behavior because it doesn't go deep enough. People have so much different experience, and these are externalized knowledge. Tacit knowledge is how you actually execute. And small teams that are allowed to form, storm, norm, and perform, if you're applying Scrum practices and you build a psychological safety, and a team can build a lot of trust. Now, the team builds trust by collaborating and have autonomy, but they're working within an organizational set of principles. There is no conflict there. You can support them both at the same time. It requires a focus on both, and then you end up with teams that can quickly sort of come up with a common perspective. And so you're just working differently, and now you're getting into a space where you're constantly shaping, and evolving the company because it's dynamic. There's no simple answer. It's not project plans. Then you have people following orders. Ray Dalio talks about this in his book Principles. It's about mental maps of how things should be done and the willingness to test and evolve. One of the interesting things about that, you're in conflict with both the market and your own organization. That's a fun place to be and challenging. And so you're making different kinds of decisions in a much, much different landscape. But this is where you stay legitimately true, and your organization can make good decisions because it's easy for an organization to lose its way because the teams at the edges who are at the front lines can't make those decisions, again, because of building these principles. And so, I'll just hop through this one quickly. There's 2 more principles. So modeling the experience curve for building and onboarding people into your evolving hedgehog construct. You have to understand, the time it takes for people to learn and onboard because decision making can't be at the top of the organization. And this is where you'll start, seeing things of, work on the business, not in the business. You need to think and focus on strategy, not operations, and it's very true. The Cynefin framework's a great model for thinking about that. I'll leave that as an exercise for the reader. Traction, your traditional one is what I was talking about. Everything gets sort of stuck at the top, and it's all upfront planning. There's no expectation of understanding. Teams do, they don't decide. Agreement is only possible by following instruction and processes, the antithesis of agile and what we try to get over in transformation. Traction at scale in a modern, you have hedgehogs everywhere. They're agile, they can operate on goals instead of instructions, they're autonomous teams, single-threaded leadership, outcome-based governance. You can get there, it's a cultivation of that capability. We wrote a book on this, The Better Way. The March of the Hedgehogs is going to be the new title, I think. And then the psychology, purpose and principles. So over the years, we've done this sort of hedgehog. We scaled rapidly. We ran into COVID and market dynamics and sort of bigger teams and organizational transformation challenges. We sort of found our new place, and we sort of were learning and evolving, and now we're hedgehogging again. And these dynamics change all the time. And the Cynefin framework's a great one for sort of understanding where you stand and making those decisions. And if there's one thing I've learned in this knowledge acquisition, you can become an expert in almost anything in 2 years. There's a 10-year famous thing, but that's if you're going to be on the orchestra, if you're going to be in the NBA. If you want to be really, really good at something, you can learn more than enough in 2 years. And so if there's something that's really sort of influenced my decision making and certainty, I used to always think in 6 months periods in the first, say, 3 years of Rangle. Now it seems much more reasonable to think in 6 years, because I can sort of see where some of the longitudinal sort of outcomes come from decisions and effort that's put in now. And so, if you anchor in your why and your principles, your hedgehog concepts, and you make these operationally, anchored in the company, you can trust experience to catch up to the journey. And, learning is compounding experiences and builds the tacit knowledge. You stay curious. And this creates the learning and the mindset, and this also creates it throughout the organization, where decision-making is a team sport, but it's an aligned team sport. It's not just sort of a chaos, and this allows uncertainty to really be tackled very well. And there's a very cool concept from Kinevin. There's a product they call sense making, and they hypothesize that the truth of your market and your reality is at the front line of your organization with about 17% of your people. If you can somehow surface that, you remove the noise and the sort of top-down decision-making and the order following. But if you can keep that hedgehog top of mind, then you can sort of manage the org, manage the scale, build out the capability, and not centralize decision-making into a very limiting sort of operating model. And thank you. If you'd want a copy of these slides, I went through some of them a little quick. You can go to Rangle.io/hedgehog. And thank you for listening and coming out.